The Board of Adjustment welcomes comment on the following items. Each person providing public comment will be limited to 3 minutes and will be asked to state his or her name and address for the public record. Is there anyone present willing to address the commission? Okay, perfect. So there's no one that wishes to speak to or address the commission, and so we'll move on to item 3 to discuss and consider action on item 3A. So elect a chair and vice chair to the Board of Adjustments. So as the previous chair, I have started this meeting, but we do need to elect a current chair and vice chair. So I'll take any nominations from the board and will state that I am perfectly willing to keep my position if y'all so choose. Are there any nominations from the board for a chair or vice chair? Or anybody willing to serve in either position?
I'd nominate Barbara for chair.
Do we have a second on that? And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And what about for vice chair?
I don't know anybody, so.
Then I will nominate Kevin for our vice chair position. And do I have a second?
Second.
Perfect. All those in favor? Aye. He had to think about that for just a second. All right. So we will now move on to our consent agenda. Sam seconded that. And motion passes, by the way, for both chair and vice chair. So moving on to consent agenda, all matters listed under consent agenda are considered routine by the Board of Adjustment and will be enacted by one motion. All items approved by consent are approved with any and all staff recommendations. There will not be separate discussion of these items. If any commissioner desires to discuss an item on the consent agenda, it will be moved to the regular agenda for further consideration. Are there any items that the commission wishes to remove from the consent agenda? And those items are 4A, approving the Board of Adjustment meeting minutes for February 16, 2022, and 4B, approving the Board of Adjustment meeting schedule for 2024. Do y'all wish to remove any of those items from the consent agenda? No, so have y'all had a chance to review both of those items? So then I will take a motion to pass our consent agenda.
Make a motion to pass the consent agenda.
Perfect. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Sam seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Amir, Sam? Aye. And motion passes. So moving on to our presentation by the city, to item 5A, to conduct a presentation on the role and responsibility of the Board of Adjustment.
Microphone set up.
No problem. Take your time.
There we go. All right. Good evening, board members. My name is Nathan Jones. I am the planning manager for City of Pflugerville's Planning and Development Services Department. The item before you tonight is a presentation on the role and responsibility of the Board of Adjustments. The Board of Adjustments is a quasi-judicial board. I'll get into more detail on what quasi-judicial board means, but just some broad information about the members and what they do. They are appointed by City Council. There are 5 board members and 2 alternatives, typically speaking. So we have about room for 5 board members, minimum of 4 to make a quorum, and then 2 alternatives. And the term, the board members serve for 3 consecutive terms of 2 years. As far as city staff goes, this is the city staff for the Planning and Development Services Department. You have Jeremy Frizzell, who's our Director of Planning and Development Services. I am Nathan Jones, Planning Manager. We also have Mike Petrosky, who is our Senior Planner. Kristen Gummelt, who is on vacation right now. She is our Planner 2. And Sammy Fleischman over here is our Planner 1. So we are your staff. We will be presenting items to you and answering any questions, drafting staff reports, all that. So next I'll go into some general process on how the board operates, what the board sees. We'll go through different application types and different requests that are made to the Board of Adjustments. So the first step in the process is once an application is submitted to city staff for review for one of the items that comes before the board, we will notify the board members that an application has been submitted. City staff will then post public notice in conformance with the rules and regulations of state law and our local ordinances. So we will send out mailed notice to neighbors within a certain amount of footage of the property, the subject property. We will set up signs at the subject property. We'll post notice in the newspaper. We'll also then take the application that's been submitted. We will review the materials. We'll provide a staff report that kind of outlines the request, any additional pertinent information that is necessary for the board to make their determination. We will provide analysis. We'll provide a recommendation to the board as far as what we think whether or not the request meets or doesn't meet certain criteria, again, for the specific types of applications that you see. And then a public hearing is held, so very much like this one that we are in attendance tonight. Public hearing is an opportunity for members of the public to come in and to speak in support or in objection to a particular request. And then BOA, the Board of Adjustments, takes action, and we'll get into that again. There's specific requirements around what taking action means and doesn't mean, and the requirements around that, but the board will consider the request and make a determination. Following that, there will be a formal letter of action that is drafted that memorializes the decision that's made by the board. And there is an optional appeals process. I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later, but there is an appeals process beyond the board. So if the board makes a determination, the applicant still has due process and can pursue an appeal if they'd like. So going more into what the quasi-judicial role means, and essentially it's very unique in terms of the different boards and commissions that the city of Pflugerville has. In this case, the Board of Adjustments is set up to make determinations on administrative actions, special exceptions, and variances. So you'll hear and make decisions on whether or not to uphold or deny an administrative decision. Special exception, we'll get into some more of the details on those also in future slides, and then variances. For each of these three application types, there are specific approval or criteria for approval. So in some cases, the board has to make a finding of fact that a certain number of criteria apply to a request. And each of those different types of, I call them applications, but each of those different types of items that you'll see have unique approval criteria to go along with them. And as I mentioned, there is an appeal process to your decision. That appeals process goes to the court of jurisdiction, which I believe is the court, the district court. So it kind of, again, is outside of our typical appeals process with other boards where some appeals would go to city council for approval. In this case, the appeals process goes to the district court. So a determination is required to be made by the board within 45 days of the public hearing. The board has to make a finding, again, to either grant, deny, or grant with conditions the variance request, special exception, and again, they have to make a finding of fact based on the required criteria. So that would mean you'd have to affirmatively, so if you're going to grant a variance, you have to affirmatively provide a reason, a factual reason for why it meets that specific criteria. You can, again, uphold or overturn the action of an administrator, and then, again, provide an official written record of action that specifies the action. So if you grant the variance or the special exception or the appeal, or you grant with conditions or you deny, that's all memorialized in a formal letter of action. And that letter of action is actually recorded with the county clerk's office and kind of runs with the land. And that must be provided within 10 days of the action being taking place. So the first item that you'd see is an administrative decision. Administrative decisions are typically related to cases that city staff has the authority to review administratively. So that would be things like site plans, interpretations of city code, things that the director or the administrator has the authority to make a determination on. If there's an appeal to that process or an objection to the way that the administrator interprets code, they could bring that to you all to make a final determination or to make a decision as to whether or not you uphold the administrator's determination or overturn it. So it applies to any person aggrieved by any decision of the administrator. Must be filed within 30 days that the decision has been rendered. During that time, it will stay all other proceedings. So if there is some sort of code enforcement issue, if there's some sort of denial of a site plan or some sort of denial that's kind of imminent, it would stay that decision for up to 30 days or up to the time that the action has taken place. If the appeal is denied or heard by the board, the same request cannot be heard within 180 days of that decision being made by the board. And the board can amend, reverse, or affirm or modify the order, requirement, or decision and impose reasonable conditions on any decision. So in this case, you can overturn an administrative decision with conditions placed on the applicant that would go forward as well. The next item is called a special exception. Special exceptions are a change to a non-conforming use to a new non-conforming use per our Unified Development Code. So a non-conforming use is essentially it's a land use that is allowed or that is in place, and if it's non-conforming, it means that it's not allowed in the zoning district that it's in which it's located. So an example of this is if a property, for example, was developed while it was in the extraterritorial jurisdiction, where there is no zoning, there is no land use authority by the city. It's developed in complete conformance and within the rules of whatever rules apply to it. Once the city annexed that property, if the zoning district that is assigned to that property doesn't allow that use that was developed previously, it's considered non-conforming. It can be legally non-conforming or illegally non-conforming, but essentially it gets to that. Zoning districts allow certain types of uses within the boundaries of the district, and if a use is in place there, and it's not allowed by that zoning district, it's either considered legally or illegally non-conforming. Regardless of all of that, the board makes determinations as to whether or not new non-conforming uses can be allowed or non-conforming uses can be switched out. So again, in making that determination, the board must find that the degree of the proposed negative impact is less than the degree of the existing negative impact. So if a current non-conforming use is being switched out for a new non-conforming use, the negative impact needs to be lessened. Essentially, we're trying to get the land uses more in line with the codes and requirements that are in place. So if the request is to be more non-conforming, then the board would have to make a finding of fact for why that's not the case. And again, in making this determination, so things that you might consider in that case would be the impact of noise, traffic, light pollution, and whether or not the proposed use is more or less compatible with existing or future uses of adjacent properties. You can, again, require conditions to be made, and then, again, you cannot increase the degree of nonconformity or create any new nonconformities. Again, try to get as close to being in compliance with the code requirements as possible. Special exceptions expire within 6 months of BOA approval, unless a CO has been issued. A CO stands for Certificate of Occupancy. At the end of the development process, the building official will issue a certificate of occupancy. That means that that structure is allowed to legally be occupied. So if it's an apartment complex, people can live there. If it's a business, people can operate out of it. But the special exception is for 6 months, and during that time, a CO for that use must be approved by the building official. Finally, we have variances. Variances are probably the most common item that comes to the Board of Adjustments. A variance is a request associated with development to deviate from specific requirements outlined in the Unified Development Code. So examples of that would be lot width, lot area width, depth, building setback, fence height, fence materials, anything that's regulated by our Unified Development Code. Our Unified Development Code sets out all of our different zoning districts that apply to all the properties within the city limits. And within each of those zoning districts are specific site design standards. So that would be things like density, the height of the structure, the massing of the structure on the site, building setbacks. All of that is regulated through the Unified Development Code. So a variance request is a change to one of those very specific site design criteria. The Board of Adjustments is prohibited from making land use variances. So that would be allowing a use that's not allowed in the zoning district to be allowed in that zoning district. Any procedural requirements, so if the UDC lays out a set of policies or a set of processes that an applicant must follow, the Board of Adjustments can't switch those things around. So if the property is required to be subdivided before a site plan can be approved, then the Board of Adjustments cannot change that order of operations. Everything still has to follow that same procedure. It also cannot increase density, can't waive or vary plat requirements, again, subdivision platting requirements. It can't grant architectural waivers. It can't make variances to conditions imposed by a specific use permit. I'll get into a little bit of detail on what a specific use permit is later, but essentially, as I mentioned earlier, we have zoning districts that apply throughout the city, and on top of that, in some districts, certain uses require what's called a specific use permit. So it's kind of like an additional layer of zoning that applies to that particular property for that particular use. It's granted by the city council. City council, when they're making the determination on whether or not to grant a specific use permit, the council has the ability at that time to allow any sort of, or to impose any additional conditions. The Board of Adjustments is not able to vary any of those conditions that are imposed by the City Council. I don't know where I was with that. And then finally, sign variances. So we have a whole other variance process for signs that is regulated through a different process. Variances or the approval of variance expires within 24 months, similarly, unless building permits have been issued and construction has commenced, the CO issued or otherwise conditioned by the BOA. So, I think I'm almost done with this presentation, but this is going to be a little bit more heady. This is kind of the meat and bones of the variance process. So as I mentioned earlier, there's the finding of fact in the letter of action. For variances specifically, there are very specific criteria that that the board needs to find are met by the request. All of the criteria must be met, and the board must affirmatively, if they're going to grant the variance, they have to affirmatively state that all of the conditions apply and for very specific reasons. The kind of overall guiding principles are that the variance cannot be contrary to the public interest. There are special conditions where the literal enforcement of the chapter would result in an unnecessary hardship. Special conditions, literal enforcement, and unnecessary hardship are all very defined terms that mean very specific things. By granting the ordinance, the spirit of the ordinance is observed and substantial justice is done. Similarly, spirit of the ordinance and substantial justice have very specific definitions in this context. No variance shall be granted, again, unless the board finds all of the required findings. And then things that cannot be taken into account when making a determination is that the property cannot be used for its highest and best use, that there is a financial or economic hardship, or is that there is a self-created hardship by the property owner or their agent. So next I'm going to go through the required findings. The first is extraordinary conditions. So this is that there are extraordinary or special conditions affecting the land involved in such a way that the strict application of the provisions of the UDC will deprive the applicant the reasonable use of their land. So in this case, you could think of things like topographic features. that would cause that there's just very unique things to the actual land itself that cause the applicant, that deprive the applicant of complying with the requirements of the code. That would be topographical issues, different geological issues, things that are unique to the site that are not the fault of the applicant, that just make it to where strict application of the code is would deprive them from the reasonable use of their land. The next is no substantial detriment, that the granting of the variance will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, or injurious to other property in the area, or to the city in administering the code. The next one is other property, that the conditions that create the need for the variance do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity. Again, kind of the idea here is that there's a very specific and very unique thing at play here that's causing this particular applicant to not be able to comply with the rules. Otherwise, the rule should not apply to anybody else in the vicinity or other properties that are similarly zoned, that are similar uses, that are required to comply with the same site design, zoning, land use requirements. And then just a few more here. Again, next one is applicant's actions, that the conditions that create the need for the variance are not the result of the applicant's own actions. Comprehensive plan, that the granting of the variance would not substantially conflict with the comprehensive plan or the purposes of this code. Just to take a pause, because I know it's been a while since the board has met. As a reminder, the comprehensive plan is our overarching planning document that City Council approves to guide decisions made by both City Council and City staff. These are primarily related to land use. So the comprehensive plan will set out the future land uses, so idealized, highest, and hopes and dreams for what the future development will bring to the city in different areas. It also lays out transportation planning items, utility planning, all sorts of stuff is in the comprehensive plan. We quote it all the time, and staff bases all of our recommendations on findings that we detail from the comprehensive plan. City staff, or City Council, I should say, approved the most recent comprehensive plan in 2022. It's called the Aspire Pflugerville 2024-2040 plan. And so we'll reference that a little bit later, but that's what the comprehensive plan is. Getting back to the required findings, utilization, that because of the conditions that create the need of the variance, the application of this code to this particular property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. So again, if the code that's in question, the variance that's in question, is applied to the property, that the property owner it would unreasonably restrict the utilization of their property for the use that is allowed that they're operating in. And then again, to kind of go back to what I mentioned earlier, insufficient findings. The following types of possible findings do not constitute sufficient grounds for granting a variance. One is that the property cannot be used for its highest and best use, that there is financial or economic hardship with complying with the code requirements, or that there is a self-created hardship by the property owner or their agent. And I think that wraps up my presentation. Just to kind of summarize everything again, Board of Adjustments is a quasi-judicial board. There's findings of fact that are required in letters of action that are required to document the determinations made by the board. Appeals process goes to the district court, and then the three different types of requests that you'll see are appeals to administrative decisions, special exceptions, and variances. Have any questions?
What are some examples of hardships that are not financial or economic?
Again, that would be if there was some sort of kind of like an act of God or some sort of topographic or things that are kind of beyond. There's a hardship at play, an unnecessary hardship where the applicant, for whatever reason, cannot comply, just for reasons completely outside of their control. They
So
cannot comply with the code.
Physically unable to control, not like they could just spend millions and millions of dollars and make it happen.
That would be a financial hardship that cannot be taken into account.
So it literally cannot be possible rather than
Right.
It's too expensive.
And then, I don't want to say it's strictly physical, because there are cases when there are other hardships that it really is a case-by-case basis. And part of the determination that's made is, again, based on the very specific cases of, so I couldn't give you a blanket answer to say that in every single case, unnecessary hardship is going to mean this specific thing. But it does mean that that it is outside of the control of the property owner or the applicant or their agent.
So would the size or shape, I guess the shape of a lot, precipitate the need for a variance?
Again, I don't want to, I mean, maybe to speculate a little bit, like maybe, so if a property is bounded on two parts by an ocean and a river, or two pieces of federal land, or if the shape of the property is essentially that way because of the actions that are outside of the control of the applicant. Now, there are some times where there are some cases where, and this is kind of goes more into, like, lot configuration is a subdivision or a platting requirement, and that is a different waiver process that actually goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission. But in a case like that, you may see a very narrow lot where the building setbacks essentially create a very undevelopable, or maybe it may be undevelopable given what the applicant wants to do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is completely undevelopable. Maybe instead of building a very large structure, they have to build a slightly smaller structure, but they can still comply with the code. It is still possible for them to comply with the code if they redesign their site. But things like lot design, that again is kind of more subdivision related. Although if there was a lot that was, non-conforming for some reason and did impose additional setbacks, or maybe there's, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example for height that would, in a large part, I should also say, is that requests that are made, obviously, as I've kind of gone through this presentation, there's a very high bar for approval. And only in very specific cases does something kind of get to the point where it would come to the Board of Adjustments for a hearing. The majority of the time, the applicant, city staff will try to work with the applicants to find ways to comply with the code, and only bring things that are kind of last resort kind of questions.
Just a general question. So there's these seven things that are required for approval. Are these all codified in the Pflugerville charter or whatever, or those specifically, or the phrasing? I was looking at the.
So
approval.
Beginning at this slide, these are all straight from the Unified Development Code. A couple places to look would be the Unified Development Code, and I can provide you guys with the references. All of it is available online.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Thank you. So it is explicitly written there. It's also in the powers and duties are codified through the city charter. So that is a good point. It's important to remember those are two different documents. City charter is and our code of ordinances, kind of a blanket requirement across the board. The Unified Development Code is a piece of the code of ordinances, but they are two different kind of documents.
And there's the portion in the charter that talks about our role and responsibilities on this board. Does anybody else have any other questions for Nathan? Perfect. Then thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Cool.
All right, we will move on to public hearing So the Board of Adjustment welcomes comment on the following items. Each person providing public comment will be limited to 3 minutes and will be asked to state his or her name and address for the public record. So the item on which you can speak is 6A 2024-0547, to receive public comment and consider a variance to sections 11.8.2 and 11.9 of the Unified Development Code to allow a chain link fence for an office warehouse use located at 16,001 Impact Way, Pflugerville, Texas 78660, to be known as the Exacco Fence Variance, BOA 2023-00137. So do we have anybody here who wishes to comment? Perfect. So do they have a presentation on it or anything? Okay, so yeah, staff presentation if y'all are ready. Welcome back, Nathan.
Hello again. It's the Nathan Show. All right. Again, my name is Nathan Jones. I'm the planning manager. The item under consideration tonight is a fence variance for the Exacco Trading Company. By way of background, the property is zoned CL5. That's our urban center level 5 zoning district. In 2020, a specific use permit for an office warehouse use was approved by the city council for this site. A site plan was approved in 2021 and construction was completed in 2022. I have the site highlighted here with a star, and then you can kind of see where it's located in relation to other properties. As mentioned, the request is to allow a variance to sections 11.8.2 and 11.9 of the Unified Development Code. Those are sections that apply to fencing materials and the base of what a fence should be constructed out of. If granted, it would allow a chain link fence for an office warehouse use to be located at 16,001 Impact Way. If not granted, the owner would be required to comply with the existing fence standards. I should also note, when staff prepared this presentation, we had a previous set of information. So the request that you see here is based on an earlier draft of a letter. We received an updated letter this afternoon, did not have time to update our slides and analysis accordingly. The applicant does have that letter, and they'll provide it to you whenever they do their presentation. But I do want to note that all of the analysis here is based on the original request that we received. We can consider any additional information, and the board can postpone action if you'd like to allow staff to have time to review everything. But I would note that the request for to kind of spoil it, the request for a chain link fence, staff did not find that request met the criteria of the code. But I did want to lay that out at the beginning. So here again, you can see the general location of where the fence would be located. I think that there's going to be some changes to that you'll see later. But generally located along the back and side of the office warehouse. And then the image to the left was the older proposed fencing material, but you can see it's chain link. Here's an image that I took today of the existing chain link fence, and just some of what the site looks like today. So some more information about the site and its adjacent uses. As I mentioned, it's zone CL5. It's surrounded by other CL5 zoned areas. The properties to the north are hotels and other commercial uses. Properties to the south of Helios are primarily office warehouse uses. And the whole area is kind of bounded to the eastern edge, on its eastern edge by Highway 130. I'd also note that the property immediately to the east, the property between 130 and the subject property is currently undeveloped. But it's the only undeveloped little parcel in that quadrant. So to kind of go into what the comprehensive plan calls for this area, the future land use that's designated in the comp plan is the mixed-use commercial. It applies to areas designated for significant development or redevelopment with high-intensity mixed-use activity centers. And here we have some cutouts from the comprehensive plan. And these talk about compatibility of new uses and building types with the future land use. So this is, again, kind of hopes and dreams, what the city council has laid out to say that they want to see new uses comply with. And so, as you can see here, it's primarily mixed use at neighborhood, community, and regional scale. Some regional office and regional shopping centers are also considered to be compatible with that future land use. Heavy industrial or light industrial flex spaces, not so much. The image to the right is kind of the overall mix of uses. So, by 2040, the idea is that properties within this future land use, when you look at them as a whole, they've kind of met this mix of non-residential versus residential uses. Some information about the zoning district. The name of it is Urban Center, level CL5. And here I have some quotes from the definition in the Unified Development Code. It's intended to establish dense, dynamic, and walkable centers for living, working, and shopping. All the buildings on ground floors within the urban centers should provide a storefront and an enhanced pedestrian environment, which collectively creates a 10-minute walking area to goods and services within the development area as envisioned by the Aspire 2040 plan. I note that these are kind of, again, more aspirational goals of the zoning district. It's the work of city council to actively update the site design requirements in the Unified Development Code to become more in compliance with the future goals that they set out for themselves in the comprehensive plan. So again, this is kind of a guiding document that and guiding text that staff will look at when we're making determinations and or when we're drafting recommendations for the decision-making boards and commissions. So the specific use permit that was granted by the City Council for this property is for an office warehouse use. And office warehouse is defined in the UDC as a building primarily devoted to storage, warehousing, and distribution of goods, merchandise, supplies, and equipment. Accessory uses may include retail and wholesale areas, sales offices, and display areas for products sold and distributed from the storage and warehousing areas. The next two slides will go into the specific chapters or the specific requirements of the UDC that are the subject of the variance. The first is found in 11.8.2, screening of mechanical equipment, and it's subsection D. All fence or wall posts shall be constructed, shall be concrete-based masonry or concrete pillars. So the pillars that constitute the base of the fences per the UDC are required to be concrete-based masonry or concrete pillars. And then perhaps most importantly is this UDC table 11.9. This table outlines the different fencing materials that are allowed for different uses throughout the city. So the way this table works is you have your uses on the far left-hand side and the different fence materials. So that's wood, chain link, wrought iron, or masonry product. And then whether it's prohibited, permitted, or permitted with conditions. As you'll see, chain link is prohibited for all uses until we get down to the industrial uses that are located within it, the LIGI only. That stands for the zoning district. So that's light industrial or general industrial only. And it's only permitted when it's not visible from public view and when it's set back at least 100 feet from public right-of-way. You'll also note that chain link is prohibited outright for industrial uses that are located within the CI or were granted by specific use permit. CI stands for campus industrial. It's kind of our least intense industrial zoning district. It allows for some office warehouse, some industrial flex. It's really kind of intended for that more of a large campus. That's why it's called campus industrial type uses. But it's less intense than light industrial or general industrial, which is where you start to get into the major manufacturing facilities and things like that. But I'd also like to note that it's prohibited for industrial uses that have been approved through a specific use permit. So something like an office warehouse that was approved through the SUP is prohibited. Chain link fence is prohibited for those types of uses. per the ADC. So again, here I'm going to kind of go through, I won't read through all these, but just to remind you, again, the required findings that the board must make. So in your determination, you'll have to affirmatively make a finding of fact that the request meets each of these findings. So again, that's extraordinary conditions, no substantial detriment, other property, applicant's actions, comprehensive plan, utilization, and then again, there's the insufficient findings. So in looking at this request, staff analyzed the request based on the conditions and required findings. What follows is our analysis. We found that it does not meet a few of the different criteria, and I'll go through those in the staff rationale for why. The first is extraordinary conditions. There are no topographic constraints that would deny the applicant the ability to provide a wrought iron or masonry product fence. The topographic features that are in play are generally found throughout the area, so they do apply to other properties in the vicinity. As I mentioned, the use is already constructed and operational, so the compliance with the fence standards would not deprive the applicant of the use of their land as an office warehouse use. Similarly, we found that it didn't meet criteria 3, that the conditions create the need do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity. Other property in the vicinity is also zoned CL5. It is constituted of other office warehouse uses. There are no other permitted chain link fences in the area. So the need for this particular use would apply to other properties if granted. Criteria 4, that the conditions that can create the need for the variance are not the results of the applicant's own actions. During the site plan review process, during the construction process, the chain link fence was installed by the applicant, and a portion of it has since been removed. But the actual chain link fence was not noted on the approved site plan. Again, if granted by the commission, or by the board, sorry, a revised site plan would be reviewed by staff that would show a chain link fence, but that is not currently permitted. And then criteria 6, again, that the conditions that create the need for the variance would not effectively prohibit it or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. As I mentioned before, the property is currently the site of an office warehouse use. It's an operational use, and the property owner is able to use that use on that site if they complied with the fence requirements. And then finally, insufficient findings, and I just put this in here for your consideration. That financial and economic hardship can't be taken into account when making a determination, and then same with the self-created hardship by the property owner or their agent. So with those findings, staff recommends denial of the variance. And that concludes staff presentation. I do have the applicant here, and she has a presentation for you as well, and I believe she has additional information for you.
Do you have the updated letter as well, Jen?
I do. Yes.
If we could
This
have
is
that,
gonna
that would be great.
fun. Yeah, let me get all this together. Do my slides just come after yours?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. All right, this one, you don't want to?
Can we ask questions on how this works?
Yeah, you can ask.
Is there like a code requirement that there has to be a fence, or is it just a question about the specific type
No,
of fence?
there is no code requirement that they have to have a fence
Okay.
that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah, the current requirement without the variance does require a masonry or wrought iron fence in that zone.
Sorry, I answered good?
You're good.
Awesome. Okay, wow, I sound a little different up here with all these microphones. So I'm Jen Henderson, owner of Henderson Professional Engineers. I'm the applicant on this particular request. We do have the owner here with us. You're going to hear from them in a minute. And so what you have in front of you is just the updated letter. It's also a letter from the neighbor that we got this week in support of this. What you see on your screen right now, this is my logo, and then this is an aerial picture of the actual building we're looking at. I love this building. I think it's one of the most beautiful buildings I've seen, and I think it has really added to the aesthetics over there in this area. So I can't help but show that off. I don't work inside the building. I do everything outside the building, but I think it's a great building. So let's talk about criteria for approval. So I want to keep all of this very short and sweet. Let's talk about how what we're asking you guys to do today is just allow the chain link fence. It's plain and simple. We want to do a black coated chain link fence. You see a bunch of pictures of that chain link fence. You've seen them in Nathan's presentation. You're going to see them a little bit today. So really big picture. This is where the actual fence is. Note that it doesn't go across the drive lanes. We feel like that is more gate material that goes across the drive lane. So the actual fence is close to the Best Western and down the back of the property where Helios Way is. I think it's important to note too that Helios Way right there is actually a private drive. It's not a city drive right there. And so it doesn't really come into play with this variance request. But sorry, I lost my place in all of my notes because I love that picture. I did note that the gates are in the pictures. This variance, I feel like what we need to really look at is the topography change between the Best Western and this building site. You will note that the Best Western is uphill. It's about 4 feet higher than this site where you drive through it. So we are down gradient of that. It is harder to build wrought iron on those grades. We know for sure that we can get the chain link to work there. It's important to note too that the picture on the left that you see, that's taken from the sidewalk that's just outside of the building off of Impact Way. And then we moved over a little bit and took a picture more to where you could kind of see the fence back there. If you look really hard back there in the picture, you can see the gate put up still. It's not very visible from Impact Way at all. So criteria 3, this is about other property. The conditions of this property are such that it's surrounded by community impact. It's got a motel next to it. You know, these other businesses don't have the exterior storage that this business does. This business really has a lot of bigger trucks that need to move around the property. I feel like that's a very unique need. You know, you don't see big trucks coming into a motel. You don't see big trucks coming in and out of community impact in the same way that you do this one. There are some more towards the industrial side, but the uniqueness of this is that it's right next to the motel. So, next slide. One of the criteria 4, is that the applicant's actions cannot create this need. You know, I think John Garrett said it really well in his letter of support. He said that this fence is going to protect the assets of the business. The immediate neighbor, that's the Best Western, has a transient population. you know, this fence is gonna help deter the crime that you see from that and will be functional and very attractive. So it's not the applicant that made this need, for the chain link fence. So criteria 6 is the utilization. You know, this business has been made aware that there's been some vehicle theft in the area and other crimes have happened near the building, mainly because of the transient population next door. But, you know, it is something that they have to be aware of, and they can't leave their materials out right now because they will walk away. So this fencing is going to add some security features, and without those security features, it really restricts the utilization of the property. We did talk with the Best Western about the fence. The general manager of the Best Western loved the idea of the fence. He welcomed the fence. He was not able to get his franchise to sign the letter that we requested, just because he didn't have enough time to get it through all of the franchise process to get it back.
Is that their current general manager or their previous one? Because I know they had one that's no longer there, John Kyle.
I think,
They do.
yeah. And I will tell you that this owner, this is Kim Cook over here, she's the owner. She goes over there and I know she's had a recent conversation with them. I would guess that it's probably both. Okay, so while you can't take it into account, there is a financial hardship with going away from the chain link fence and forcing the wrought iron fence. So it's important to say that you can't really buy a wrought iron fence. Now you buy an aluminum fence. That's the best I could find to kind of compare the pricing. So this chain link fence, generally speaking, when you buy a chain link fence, it's about $13 a linear foot. Now I put the wood one on here because you see that at your house and you can kind of compare, like, what are they spending in comparison to what you would. The aluminum fence is about 4 times what you would be spending on chain link. Now I can tell you, based on the general contractor's price to put in the fence, they spent about $30,000 on this fence. It's a nice fence, and I would hate to see them have to change all of the gates and all of the mechanisms and all of the things just because they can't do this chain link fence.
How many feet of fence do they currently have existing?
It's right about, I think it's about 200 linear feet.
There's 200.
How much was it before y'all were forced to take it down?
It was about 200.
Oh, yeah, y'all do need to come up with y'all. But if Jen knows
Yeah.
the answer.
Yeah, it's about 200 linear feet
Okay.
of fencing that had to come down, and it's in a big roll inside of the building right now. So, I mean, the fence has been purchased, and so what you don't see included in this number to kind of really get your head wrapped around it is the labor involved in putting it back up. That's really hard to compare to. So really, this is just about comparing materials to materials so that you can understand why this is so much more expensive. So I just want to leave you guys, this is the last picture looking over at the Best Western from the property. You see the fence posts are up. The fence is not there in this picture. But, you know, I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. You know, we do agree that there's no detriment by having a chain link fence here. I think it's going to be something that will deter crime. You know, the neighbors are very supportive of this. That's the Best Western. That's the community impact people. You've got John's letter. You know, the materials for this have already been purchased. They're on site. We really just need to get them put back up so that the security of this site will be intact again. You know, we would recommend approval of the fencing so that the site can can move forward. We've been working on this since 2021, and so, to get this finally complete would be a great process. I do also want to say thank you all for coming forward, putting your name in the hat to be on the board, and for accepting the position on the board. This variance we've been trying to get here for well over a year, so thank you all for being here. I'd like to pass it to Kim Cook now. She is one of the owners, and I think she's got some things to add.
Yeah, I have some pictures. I don't know how to show them to you. Because I just thought, well, okay, I have a lot on my desktop. I'm just gonna give y'all a better sense of what a building's like.
I've driven through there.
Yeah, but, so we had to post up because basically we couldn't move in.
Before you make a lot of comments here, I will need you at the
Yeah,
microphone,
please.
but you can leave photos of
Okay. I can tell you kind of. Anyway, I'll come pass. I just thought, I didn't prepare anything. I just want to give you a better sense of us and what we were trying to do here. So Exco's a family-owned business, 35 years. We finally got our act together to build our own building, and we came to Pflugerville. And we wanted to do something very special. Our design is unique, looks like a barn, has a clear story. You have solar panels on the roof, a water cistern. We sell greenhouses from Europe. We wanted a high-end building look, to tell you the truth. And I think you might like it if you went over there and looked at it and looked at our European greenhouses in our showroom. When we came up with the idea for the fence, we had been in a building in North Austin that was leased. It was over near the soccer stadium. And we proceeded to lose catalytic converters left and right. They're very expensive, and we had a trailer stolen right in front of our cameras. It was taken, and we got it back 5 years later. So we were aware of crime. When we came up to Pflugerville, we thought we need to be more careful. So it was decided that we would try to do a fence, and we didn't go for a cheap aluminum fence. We went for a high-end, we thought, plastic-coated, long-lasting fence, and that's around the corner in my neighborhood, and where I live, it's considered a higher-end fence. Now, your guide says 2 different kinds of fences, but guess what? There are a lot more in the market. This happens to be one that's not specifically mentioned. For an industrial use, you could usually have aluminum chain link fencing, and we are in a nice park, but we're also an industrial building. So what we've experienced since we've been there is when we started construction, we were seeing a lot of cars were cutting through from Impact Way to Helios, and that was sort of a traffic hazard and a problem that we could see developing. So we knew we had to cut that pass-through, which is actually a fire lane. The other thing, in the last 2 weeks, there have been 9 cars broken into at the Marriott and the Best Western. I visited with both general managers about the situation. What's happening is, unfortunately, they're finding that they come off of 130 and come over to these hotels, and they've broken into the cars and stolen tools, passport, firearms, unfortunately. They were checking with us because we have outside cameras. We have a lot of cameras, but we didn't have any that way. So this fence is not very visible. Guess what? It's mainly for us. You can't see it at all from Impact Way. If you look at the picture, it's right there at the corner of our warehouse. It actually just goes down, goes 2/3 down, I'd say, the Best Western property line. Then, actually, the fence starts. And it goes down a short distance, and then it goes across the back north-south part of the property, which is actually a dividing line between the property that we've developed and the second property we actually own. The plan is to take down that fence. This is just a temporary thing until we build a second building, hopefully soon, if interest rates go down. The whole area had to be dug out, so everything is low. And we're just hoping to not have a situation where people can come down into our truck yard, go up where you've got a row of pickup trucks generally parked at the Best Western that people can break into, or just go into our truck yard and come and take our catalytic converters that we experienced in Austin. So we're not trying to run a business park or anything else. We're trying to really follow the rules here. And we've actually, with our original building, we've checked more boxes than you even have with the design of it, because it's so unusual. We were shocked that we had to take it down. We just currently have gates that are up. There's no chain link fencing or black metal fencing up, but you see exactly where the poles are. You see exactly how high it would be and who it affects. Mainly is affecting us. And we're just hoping to protect our property. And so we would love to take the roll of metal fencing that we currently have in our warehouse and just be able to put it back up is the bottom line. And we will likely take down the longest portion that's along the north-south part when we build the second building. Because that would, if we do another warehouse over there, then it would be, the docks would all face into the truck courtyard. Right now, it just allows us not to have people be able to walk around. So that is the bottom line of why I'm not giving you all these professional opinions, but why me as a property owner was trying to do this fence and would still very much like to put up this very expensive fence that we've already paid for. I love the rules in Pflugerville. I know what you're trying to do, but sometimes things can be hard on a business to afford certain kinds of fencing. And they also can have an impact on how people respond to that. I noticed across the way, someone with a fence, and he's got all sorts of mesh around it because he didn't want anybody to look in on his data center. And the reason why is it's he's got very valuable data in there. But can he afford a brick wall all the way around that? No, probably doesn't want to do that. And so, he has to somehow block it off. So I would ask that a Board of Adjustment listen to a story about why it is a property owner would like a variance, would like you to make an adjustment, and see why we should be granted this.
So at what point were y'all notified that y'all wouldn't be allowed to have a chain link fence up?
When we were trying to move in, we were 8 months behind being able to move into our building because of delays during COVID. And we were trying to exit our buildings that we had leased in North Austin. It was really tough. It was really hard to consolidate down our leases. And our building had some issues with receiving steel in on time, so we kept trying to get this thing done, which is really hard as a small business. And finally, we were getting it done, and it was, oh no, you can't get your certificate of occupancy because you've got this fence up. And we did not know we were violating a rule, and we just had to take it down. And that was the only way we could get in, and we had to get operating as a business. So that's what we did, and then we moved in November 2022. So we've been hoping, to come before the Board of Adjustment and plead our case, because we've spent a lot of money on that, and we thought it was very attractive fencing, and we would like to be able to put it up.
And I'd like to ask the same question of city staff. Is at what point were they given the UDC that says that they were not allowed to put up a chain link fence?
Sure.
Well, I reviewed the site plan that was approved for the, I wasn't the original reviewer, but in preparation for this, I went back and tried to do some research into what was approved and what wasn't approved and when. The chain link fence is not noted on the site plan, so to kind of give some example, or to kind of go through the process of what it's like to close out a site plan, go through the construction process, and then be issued a CO. At the very beginning of that, the site development plan kind of lays out all sorts of stuff on the site, the actual location of the building, height, architectural design, and then for landscaping purposes, a landscaping plan is required, and that will generally show location of any fencing. As noted earlier, fencing is not required, but if it is proposed, we have it shown on the actual site plan itself so that we can review it for any fencing standards that we would have. So there wasn't chain link fence that was actually noted on the face of the site plan. And so, once the site plan was approved, we had reviewed it to make sure that it met all of the requirements of the code, which staff administratively made the determination that it did. At which point they're free to go about the construction process and then work with the building official to get their final CO. And it's at that stage that once the property is, or once the structure is ready for occupancy, the building official will often contact the planning staff who reviewed the site plan, as well as engineering staff. Will conduct a final walk, provide the contractor with a set of punch list items, as we call it, which is essentially things that were either missing. So again, we would look for things like fencing materials, or if a fence is there that it was not shown on the site plan, we would make a comment of that at the time of CO to say, hey, there's this thing on here, it's not noted on the site plan, and it's not in conformance with the code requirements. So we would not be able to issue a CO. In this case, we wouldn't be able to issue a CO for structure with the chain link fence because the UDC didn't allow it.
How are they notified that that's, like, let's say they decide they want to put up a fence? What's the process for them to know that they only have two types they can use? Is there like
After it's built or before?
well, let's say either one, like, how are they informed that, hey, if you're going to build a fence, it has to be one of these two?
So there's a couple of different ways that can happen. If I'll kind of go sequentially. So before, if it's under review, we kind of rely on the applicant to tell us what they want to do. And then we tell them whether or not what they want to do meets or doesn't meet the code requirements. Again, as an administrative body, we don't have the authority to really waive anything. We just have to review everything based on the strict application of the code. So we, like I said, we rely on the applicant to present to us what their design is, and then we work with them to make sure that it meets all of the code standards. So if they didn't show it on the site plan, we would not have asked them to show it on the site plan. So that's kind of the before.
So
If it,
because it was noted in the legend there, was there any point at which y'all asked, like, why have y'all noted that there might be a chain link fence? I don't see it in your plan, but is there a plan for this that we haven't seen yet? Is there any point at which y'all talk to them about that? Because I do see it in the legend, and I've dug through all of the entire site development plan, and I don't see where it's drawn anywhere, like you said.
Right.
But it was noted, so I'm like, well, I mean, they clearly maybe planned on putting one up.
I wasn't the planner at the time. I'd need to go back and review so when we're reviewing a site plan, we will go through many different rounds of review. So we'll review it once, provide the applicant with a string of comments. I'd have to actually go back and double check that to determine whether or not the comment was brought up at a certain point. I will say generally, city staff will, we'll look at in generality what's on the site plan. So oftentimes there will be things that are noted in the legends that are not shown anywhere else, and it's not necessarily something that requires a comment to be made. It could just be a standard legend item that the engineer or the surveyor wants to have on all of their plan sets. We would really explicitly make a comment on it if it was actually shown on the site plan itself. It may be something that was missed by the original reviewer, but to kind of go back to double check that, I'd have to go back and review all the comment history.
Did Kim or Jen, do either of y'all know if a conversation was ever had about why it was in that site development plan and not on any of the maps?
So I do recall putting that there's a chain link in the legend. I don't recall any conversations about it while we were permitting the site development plan. The first time we heard about it was when it was put up and then they were required to take it down to get the CO. I had some conversations, just verbal conversations with some city staff about it. Nothing was ever written down about it.
It seems like the variance here is that you just want to use a chain link fence instead of another fence, not that you want to put a fence up in general. Can you speak a little bit to like why, like, because you saw the same thing list we did on what we were allowed to rule on, but can you speak a little bit to why it has to be a chain link fence?
Sure. So, yes, when you really strictly apply the code the way it's written, it has to be wrought iron. Wrought iron isn't something that's actually made anymore. It's actually an aluminum type of fence that you have to buy that is a wrought iron look. The reason it's the chain link is because that was one of Kim's decisions. It's a very nice looking fence, and she sees it in Austin quite a bit. You see that at a lot of elementary schools, a lot of industrial uses. It's something that she liked, something that would be more transparent, almost opaque from Impact Way. So you wouldn't really see it until you get up on it. So I think that was more of the decision. Do you want to talk more about
Yeah,
that?
we never, I think we weren't trying to like violate rules or anything. We didn't really fully understand that it wasn't allowed, but
Can I add a comment? I think this is important here.
this is my husband Andrew.
Sorry, guys.
He's Dutch.
You should like introduce yourself.
I'm Andrew Cook, her husband. What I think is important to note, at the end of 22, when we were ready to move in and we were 8 months late, at the height of COVID and everything was happening, we were over budget with this building, like crazy. So we had planned to put a fence up. We worked with Jan. She did talk with the city. As she said, there's not really good conversation. She asked, could we put a fence up? And we got the answer, yes, you could fence up. What was lost in translation that we really didn't know the fine print is you couldn't put up a chain link fence. So we did work as strictly as we could with some money that we had left, $30,000 to get those gates and this black iron. We didn't want a chain link fence that was silver. That was not the question. We just bought the black vinyl coated. It's twice as expensive. It is nice. We'd seen it around schools, and that's why we bought it. And then we heard later, hey, it's not approved. And we're sorry for that. Now we're in a whole different time table. At that time, we were at our limits and couldn't afford to put anything better up. That's why we did this, in order to protect all our materials and our trucks and our cars.
Do you have any documentation of like that conversation with the city?
Now that was what she did. She had some conversations, could we put a fence up? And she reported back to us, yes, put a fence up. And then AD and Associates, who was our contractor, organized the fence and everything else.
So it was purely verbal conversations,
Yeah,
nothing
verbal
was ever written? You were gonna say something, Jeremy? Or did everything get answered?
And I would, looking back through the comments, it does look like there was reference to where there was something that had been noted and it needed to be identified as the different type of material, where it was going to be located, and then it appears like it was removed at some point.
From the site plan?
Yeah, through the site plan process. That's why it was not on that site plan. But I think it was left inside of the legend, probably inadvertently.
So they were planning on putting it up and then decided not to?
There was a fence, it appears based on the comment letters that there was a fence that was intended to go up, or there was a wall of some sort that was planned. And the reviewer was asking for the materials.
Gotcha. So there was never any discussion on whether or not
I
it
don't-
was chain link?
Yeah, I don't see a specific statement of chain link is not permitted or anything like that. It says that please show opaque wall along property line fronting 130. Sheets do not show the location of the fence within the plan set. You know, it looks like there was discussion about a wall to be located there, and then was requesting material information.
We never got the city never got that.
I don't see in a quick review of the previous comments anything where it says specifically chain link. But again, to what they've stated is that once it's installed and it's put up, and then they go out and they do the site walk, they see something that's not on the plan or is missing from the plan, is when that information is brought up.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Is there any documentation about the discussion of the material
So I'm pretty hard of hearing, and I think what you're asking is there documentation on on the fence or the wall? Is that what?
The materials.
Oh, the materials. So in the searching of so you also have to understand that there's a couple of different emails involved here. I couldn't find it in my current email. We permitted this when I had a different email, and so I can't really go back and research that one. So I was not able to locate it.
Hey, Amir, if you can make sure you're speaking into the microphone, it might help them hear you as well. So, does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, just a few questions. Just kind of offhand, how tall is the fence?
I think it's 6 feet.
And I guess the other question I had is, so facilities in that zoning, in that CL5, and in that area do not necessarily have to have a fence. How many in that area, if you know, Nathan, or any of you, have fences? I mean, certainly if the
There's a
hotel's
couple.
up, but then you have the industrial.
FedEx, probably FedEx has
I
one.
can note that there may be fences on site. We could certainly go back and pull that information, but there are no other permitted. If for other fences to have chain link, we would have gone through the same process of the variance process and brought that to the board. And there are no other permitted variances for chain link. There may be, somebody may have installed chain link at some point that we don't know about, at which point it would be a code enforcement issue. But in terms of things that were approved through the administrative site design process, there aren't any other. There may be other fences there, but there aren't any other chain link.
Are there other wrought iron fences or stone?
I believe there are other.
fences in
There are other
area?
locations. Yeah.
Okay, so other
FedEx has a wrought iron fence
other ones have
further to the
other
south.
owners or other facilities have installed the wrought iron fence.
Are there specific definitions of what is a wrought iron fence, what is a chain link fence, and
No, our UDC doesn't define wrought iron. As I mentioned earlier, there is an option for an administrative interpretation. So in cases like this where our code is vague, an applicant can ask essentially the director or the administrator to take that into account. So to look at different material types, metal types, if it's aluminum, if it's some other type of metal, and to ask the administrator to say, is this still in the spirit? We have this fence type. We know what the code is trying to not allow, chain link, so linked fencing. We have this different material type. We feel like it meets the spirit of the ordinance. They could ask the planning director to make a determination as to whether that does or does not meet. So in a case like this, we don't have that request on file, so I couldn't speak formally or state definitively whether or not it would, but that request could go to the director. He would then make a determination, and then that could be appealed again to you guys.
in the code itself, does it say you can have these two types of fences only, or does it say you can have these two types of fences and not chain link?
Let me pull that
So
up
that's
real quick.
one sheet that you're showing with the table that says, sorry. There's a sheet that has the table that says what kind of fence you can use for what zone.
Is that table in the code, or?
It's in the staff report,
It's
and it's in
also-
the code.
Yes.
So this is, yeah, he's
So
got
it
it up,
specifically
but
says
he's got it.
prohibited.
And this, I do need to be specific here. It's not an industrial use. It's considered an office warehouse use per their specific use permit. That could fall somewhere between commercial uses and industrial uses. So depending on the look and feel of the property, as I mentioned, I put the definition for office warehouse in there to kind of give an idea of how the UDC defines an office warehouse as opposed to an industrial flex space. But the use that is allowed by right through their SUP is office warehouse use. If it operates more as an industrial use, then we would look at that second. That industrial use is CI or SUP. So industrial uses that were permitted through an SCP, so an office warehouse or an industrial flex space use or something like that, would also be prohibited per this chart. wrought iron, masonry product, or wood are also permitted. Or wood is prohibited, I'm sorry, but wrought iron and masonry are permitted.
What is the process for changing this?
So that kind of, I guess, it could be kind of a rabbit hole answer, and I'm going to try really hard not to give you that. But essentially, the city council the city council adopted the Unified Development Code in the same way that it adopted every other law that applies within the city limits, everything that's codified in the Code of Ordinances. So at the end of the day, this is the city council saying that that they want the chain link to be prohibited for industrial uses. The city council could amend the Unified Development Code to change that. That's a different process that can be initiated by city council. There are a lot of notification requirements. You've heard of zoning, land development code rewrites or Unified Development Code rewrites. It's essentially that process where the city council changes the rule and it applies to everybody the same way.
And so any variances, like if we were to approve the variance, it would be specific to their location. It would do nothing to touch the existing code.
And any decision by Board of Adjustment does not create precedents.
Correct. And we can set
So we
any
could
conditions as well.
Set the variance here, but then in a year, when their neighbor comes in and asks for the same thing, we could deny it.
Correct.
So the fencing type you have is a roll of chain link on the pre-existing posts, which are still up?
All the posts are still up in concrete. We just left them. It's as I said, it's not regular chain link. It's this black coated heavy duty stuff, and which I would never have regular chain link because I don't like the look. We were trying to upgrade a building, and so yeah, that's we've got it sitting in there ready to go. We've already paid for it, and we just love to put it up, especially with the changes that are kind of going on in the business part.
Do you remember what it was called specifically? Or-
I don't know. I've got it as a line item in I printed out the budget thing with you, but it doesn't tell me what it was. Yeah,
I don't remember.
I don't know.
It's been way too long.
Yeah, we were trying to sort out all these details. Get it
Do
from
you
the
know,
company.
Jeremy?
I don't. I think one other question would be just as a clarifier on I think there was a note previously, and it looks like in here it also talks about having that you're wanting the chain link and also have the plastic inserts to completely screen the entire site. Can you speak to that to make sure that
That's not.
I'm
in
happy
there.
to speak to that
Yeah.
one. So I think you're looking at the last letter, maybe I didn't take that out of it. There was some discussion back in 2022 about putting those slats in there at that time. That was taken off the table, that they do not want to do that. I probably left it in inadvertently, and we do not want to do that slat type anything. It is just the fencing, no
So
plastic.
the
That's right, I don't like,
plastic
I don't
would be
like
no.
those at all, and I would never endorse those, because guess what? They don't last very long, and they're gonna fall apart, and I would never endorse that. So, sorry, but we were only gonna go for something at this level, this is the only thing.
Does anybody else have any questions for city staff or Kim or Jen?
So,
Great, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all
as a quick
coming in for the one
clarifier,
case.
it looks like when they were doing their site development, they were going to be on a different site. Then they moved over to the other site where they've constructed their building. So there was conversation about screening was going to be on the east side over by 130, and then when they moved over to the other side, they said that they weren't going to do the vegetation screening thing that I was making reference to. So just
So do you
just
think
as a
that might
clarification.
have caused confusion?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
could have.
Moving sites?
Right.
Yeah,
So they were on one site, and then they moved over to the other site.
but the fencing requirements are the same.
It would have been the same, but I think that's where the confusion came up, is that they just relocated the buildings from the one eastern lot that they were talking about to the western lot.
But the zoning is the same, right? It's
Correct,
CL5.
yes. Still,
When I do have to open or close the public hearing at this point as well, so I will take a motion to close public hearing, because I don't believe there's anybody in the audience that wish to speak on this. Okay, I'll take a motion to close public hearing at this time. Who's making the motion? You are, Mayor? Who's second? I'll take a second.
I'll second it.
Kevin seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and motion passes. All right, so do y'all have any further discussion that y'all would like to have between our board about this item or anything for this fence? Do y'all have any other questions or comment about this?
I don't.
So,
I mean, and this is the discussion part?
This
Or
is the
we-
discussion part where we can discuss what we need to before we make a decision.
I mean, there's a lot of things to discuss, brought up, the various speakers, whether the location, neighboring, the height of the ground, crime. But I think from my point of view, it just, it's hard to get past that this was the requirement. And I imagine when they were building this, whoever was doing it should have known the requirements, regardless of any insinuation of staff. Not nefarious, but overlooked things. I think it would just be difficult. While there are other facilities in the area that have applied for that, I think it feels like it just comes down to wanting to use the materials that they bought before and not put in a wrought iron fence.
Does anybody else have any comments or discussion?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the question of whether or not they want to put up a fence, it's the type of fence. I don't know if, based on the criteria that the city staff gave, I don't know how to justify the variance.
So I believe that, personally, so I'm in favor of the variance because I believe that they weren't notified that they could not have a chain link fence. Because when you're developing plans, there's so much to go through. I don't believe that they were known since there's staff change and all of that. I believe that there may have been an oversight. And so for me, I would potentially approve it, but with a condition where if everybody would potentially be okay with it, I'm not making a motion, it's just discussion, but where there's a condition that if at any point that fence degrades and has to be replaced, that it be replaced and brought back up to code, that it be replaced with wrought iron or masonry. They're not allowed to replace it with another chain link fence. So would that be allowed if we were to do that?
I would just note that you have to make a finding of fact for why
Oh, I know.
that meets
Correct.
all the different criteria. But yeah, you could add you can add conditions to your determination. And it would be codified again, it would be recorded and run with the land.
Yeah.
Can we still ask questions?
Yeah.
Have you guys verified that all the fences that are wrought iron are not aluminum?
I do not believe we have.
As opposed to the discussion that was brought up, there's no really wrought iron anymore, it's just aluminum.
Well, there
It
there
looks
is,
like
there's a
wrought
difference
iron.
between aluminum and wrought iron. So wrought iron is a specific definition, and aluminum is different. So technically, aluminum would not be up to code either.
But staff, as the administrator, can allow wrought iron looking aluminum.
Right.
And has that been done?
We have not
Sure,
received I mean,
Would y'all notice the difference between the two?
I think that we've had conversations with school district in certain circumstances where they were trying to find a way to be able to meet the code requirement of the design and the style and meet the intent of that without doing a true iron.
What was the conclusion there?
They have that. Yeah, I think that was at Bowles at the new school over there by Weiss Lane.
So they were allowed to basically meet
The
the
design
intent of
and
the
the
law
style.
without the actual
The
letter
style.
of it. This specific clause where it's the definition of the rules on the fencing, when was that originally put in? Is that new to the recent code, or has that been there for a while?
It's been there a while. I would say that we made code changes in 2015, and prior to that was 2009 time period.
So we don't really have a concept of what the original intent was of why those specific fence types, or?
I'm curious as to why masonry or why wrought iron? Why is that part of the code? Is it purely aesthetic? Is that,
Because they're really expensive types of fence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's aesthetics.
And as I recall, when we were going through when the community was going through and setting these zoning zones, I guess, for along the 130, there's visions of wanting to make this, and I think I saw this before, like kind of walkable, not industrial park areas. Is that correct?
it is, but if you look at all the plats that are in that area, directly to the south of them, it's industrial. They own directly to the east of them. It's the hotel to the north of them, and then it's the other hotel across the street. And right in the courtyard is directly across the street from them, and then PCDC is as well. Like that's that whole. So there
I
is.
think when they
They
being
can
developed, I think
hope,
they're
but-
aspirational
Yes.
on what would locate there.
Correct.
Now, what has actually located there is
Yep.
not.
It's
what
all
they
industrial
aspired
and
to.
hotel. So yeah.
So I think that's why they
Yeah.
chose those
Yep.
types of fences.
And then truly the only property that is affected by the chain link fence that existed there and that has been taken down is the Best Western. So it's the only one that connects with them directly, right? The other one is owned by Execo.
It's currently owned by Execo, yes.
Yeah. Is there, but I don't know if y'all can discuss it. Is it planned to be sold at any point?
It wouldn't matter one way or another. Those those requirements would kind of run with the land. So if a chain link fence is allowed there, then if Execo decides to sell that property at some point to somebody else, then they would have, that other land use could develop there under whatever is allowed by right under the zoning district.
Unless there's a condition set that it's only for that current owner and it doesn't transfer to the next owner and it's only for that lot and not the other lot.
I don't know if we can restrict it to ownership type.
No?
That's something that I think we'd have to, that type of condition, I think would have to be reviewed by our city attorney. As far as I understand it, it would operate like a restrictive covenant, so regardless of the owner, the use would be allowed, or the chain link fence would be allowed.
Does anybody else have any other discussion?
So they own that empty lot.
They do.
Is that correct? Okay.
So Execo owns they own both
And so there's
plots.
discussions of a second building that would be.
Correct, which is what they mentioned. It'd be part warehouse, I believe, or if you speak, you have to come up to the microphone, Kim. I'm so sorry. But I had already closed public hearing, so you're not allowed to come up.
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
I didn't mean-
So, does that answer enough of your question? Because I believe it was going to be warehouse or, yeah. All right, anybody else? If not, then if anybody would like to attempt a motion, if not, I would be happy to attempt one.
Well, in order to grant this variance, we'd have to justify it,
All of the
all
criteria.
the criteria. How
Correct.
are you seeing that on the ones that were in contention?
Excuse me?
Like, how would you say you're in favor of
So
granting
the,
it? So extraordinary conditions,
so I believe, so I do have, I've been looking at this since we got the information, and so I do have each criteria met, per my understanding of what that criteria is, and so I'd be happy to read that for y'all.
yeah, please.
So for me, criteria one, extraordinary conditions, it's the applicant should reasonably be allowed to provide security for their facility and their employees due to their unique condition of being directly adjacent to a hotel. There is higher volume of vehicles attempting to cut through their facility to enter and exit the hotel, as well as a potential increase in theft and crime, as well as the grade change between the two properties. If anybody from the hotel were to trip down that hill, it would be on their property and they would be legally liable for that. The criteria two, no
Isn't that just like the justification for a fence?
for a fence, correct. And so I have to meet all the criteria. So the no substantial detriment is granting the variance would not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, and will not be injurious to other properties in the area. Other properties, the conditions would not apply to other properties in the community. If approved, variance would only apply to Lot 2E. The applicant's actions, I do not believe the need for a variance is not due to the applicant's own actions. Although the location of the chain link fence was not specified in the initial site development plan, the use of a chain link fence was included and the overall plan was approved. It is understandable that they believe that they could use a chain link fence. The time to question the use and location of the chain link fence, in my opinion, would have been before that site development plan was approved, when the city saw chain link fence listed on that legend. The comprehensive plan granting the variance would not substantially conflict with the comprehensive plan and the purposes of the code. And for utilization, applying the code at this time would effectively prohibit or restrict the utilization of the property. Execo is currently unable to obtain their certificate of occupancy, hindering their ability to commence operation out of that building. And so they cannot use the property currently as intended. And if we do not approve this variance, they will be further delayed in their certificate of occupancy because they would. So the next would be insufficient findings. After reviewing all documents provided by the Board of Adjustments, as well as the Unified Code, Development Code for the City of Pflugerville, I made all of the above decisions on criteria without considering any financial hardships. While the facility could be used without the fence or with a different fence, this is not a self-created hardship, I believe, by the owner, because I believe there is a miscommunication between the owner and staff. And I believe it was an oversight during the approval process. And so because they already have an existing chain link fence, I would approve them keeping their fence so that they are not further delayed in their process.
Just a quick clarifier, they do have a certificate of occupancy.
They do?
They
Okay.
were-
It's a temporary though, right? Yeah.
They were granted a certificate of occupancy to occupy the property. They were moving through wanting to do a variance, and so they removed the fencing components so that they could have that piece.
Gotcha.
And they're operating.
Okay. So anyway, those were my hitting every criteria.
Jeremy, when did they receive their certificate of occupancy, do you recall? November 22? I'm not sure if that's a different date or November.
November 2022.
So does anybody else have any discussion on those items that I read?
What was the process here? There's discussion, vote, or?
Discussion, so somebody would need to make a motion to either approve or deny the variance, whether that be me or one of y'all, along with the specifications, like if we were to approve it, the specifications for what we are approving with any conditions that we would apply to it as well, and a denial was just a denial. And all four of us have to vote either in favor or against for it to pass. Because we have a quorum here, we have to have all four of us vote, because we do not have a fifth member of our board.
We have to vote, but not all vote the same, right?
We have to all vote the same in order for something to either pass or be denied today.
For it all to be approved. In order to,
Right.
in order to approve a variance request, then all
Yeah.
four will be required to
Yeah.
have that same motion.
And if I make a motion to deny, then we all have to make,
Then,
Well, I think it just doesn't get approved.
yeah, then it, right.
regardless of the vote.
That, a motion to deny, an affirmative motion to approve, it allows
Four
you,
affirmative votes.
all four need to approve, yeah.
And to deny,
And for the denial component, it's, if there's a motion for denial, then you're gonna be moving forward on denials.
If there's a vote to approve and it doesn't get the majority, does it just, this case stays in process, or is it?
No, it's
then
denied.
it's denied.
Okay.
And so
Because it did not receive the board's approval.
let's start there to see where we're at, and if it gets denied, it gets, so because of all of the
If it's
criteria.
denied, it's denied, then it's dead, so.
If this motion does not pass, then it gets denied. And so I would like to make a motion to approve the variance to allow the use of the chain link fence as outlined in the variance letter without the plastic slats, because that was the current intention, for Lot 2E and only Lot 2E. I would also like to set the following condition on that motion, that if at any point 50 feet or more of that existing chain link fence is to degrade to the point of needing to be replaced, that it be replaced with a wrought iron or masonry fence to comply with the Unified Development Code. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Amir seconds. All those in favor, we'll start with Amir. Let's go one at a time.
Approve, yes.
Yes,
Aye.
Sam?
Approve.
Kevin?
Deny.
And I approve, and the motion fails. So I'm sorry, Kim, your variance is denied.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody want to buy something?
All right, so the last part is I will take adjourn the meeting at, what time is it? Our meeting of the Board of Adjustment is adjourned at 9:16 PM.